you look into almost any classroom, you find all of the varieties of strength and talent and weakness and fear and doubt and aspiration that we can find anywhere. Students from different language groups, different cultures represented. And to look at that variety and assume that it would be best taught in only one way seems to fly in the face of logic. Seems much more logical and much richer to develop a diversity of ways to teach the diversity of students in the classroom. Complex instruction is a collaborative instructional strategy developed by Elizabeth Cohen at Stanford University. It has a number of goals, but among the most important are to make sure that as students work in a group, every person in the group has something remarkably important to contribute to the work of the whole, and that the work that the students do is at a very high level of thought.
In this program, University of Virginia professor Carol Tomlinson helps us examine complex instruction as one strategy for differentiating instruction. We'll visit Zoe Padrone's 6th grade social studies class to see how she uses a complex task that engages students in high-level thinking and requires important contributions by all group members in order to achieve success.
When students work in groups, there are a number of problems that occur. There's always either one child who feels like their contributions are not significant, or another child who feels like their contributions are so significant that they don't need anybody else in that group. The other thing I see happen, especially when you deal with mixed abilities in one classroom, is that you have kids who see each other as the smart kids or the dumb kids, and what happens is they sort of either become very controlling or they become very disempowered.
Cohen cautions us that it's very important to understand that any student who is functional at school has real intelligent strengths that make them appealing to their friends and able to be participants in life. And the key goal of complex instruction is to design tasks in such a way that we call on the legitimate intellectual strengths of every child in a group.
Okay, go find your groups. The students in this class have a very wide variety of needs, abilities, talents, achievements, achievement gaps. We start with kids who are just below grade level, sort of for social studies and English, they're around 5th grade readers. 4 of the students in that class are high school level readers, 11th, 12th grade. 2 of the kids are on IEPs because they're special ed. 1 of the children in that class is also ED. So we have a huge range academically. We also run the range racially and economically. Okay. What are you guys doing? Yeah? Okay, good. As you guys know, we've been doing the Civil War for some time. And we're going to start out a project that goes with our concepts for the year. What is one of the concepts of our year? Flora?
Power.
Power is one of them. What was our concept last year in 5th grade? We've been sort of integrating it in. Katie?
Perspective.
Yeah, perspective. The way we do our units is we begin with looking at our standards of learning, and then from that we distill out the major concepts that we're going to focus on. We've also distilled out a concept for the entire year. So our concept for the year is power. What we're going to do with this project is we're going to use those 2 concepts, power and perspective, to explore what should be memorable about the Civil War, but also including the antebellum period. So this project is going to be one where you have to decide what from that time period is worth remembering. But remembering can mean a bunch of different things. You can be remembering something because you mourn its loss, or you could be remembering it because it's something that was so great you don't wish to forget. It will be up to your groups to decide which of those 2 things you'll want to do. Okay, everybody open up your packet. Take a look at the assignment sheet that says monument or memorial to the antebellum period or the Civil War. Okay, let's take a look here. A monument is a statue or other enduring piece designed to remember and celebrate a great accomplishment, achievement, or contribution made by a person or a group of people. I'm reading in the first paragraph. Does everyone see what I'm reading? A memorial is made to remember and mourn something or someone whom we do not wish to forget for their importance, contributions, or because they have been wronged or suffered unfairly. Your assignment is to create either a memorial or a monument to something or someone from our unit on the Civil War. You may include the people and events from the antebellum period which relate closely to the Civil War. And that would include things like the abolitionists, the women's rights and suffrage movement.
The first step in planning a high-quality complex instruction task is the same as with any other instructional task, and that is to be absolutely clear on what the task should cause students to know, understand, and be able to do as a result of completing the task.
I always begin with the standards of learning and with our essential questions and understandings, because I think that the standards of learning are limited to facts and information and skills. That's where enduring understandings and essential questions come in. With this project, I started with a question of what's important, why remember the Civil War? And so I started asking myself questions, and I realized that the best thing to do is have the students ask themselves those questions. And so that's what I tried to do, was create something where they had to ask themselves those questions. Why is this important? Why do we study this? What are the causes? What are the effects? What is the long term? How does it fit in? And so what I did was I came up with a format that was malleable enough to be able to fit whatever the answers to those questions were. I like to start with a culminating activities. What are the skills my students supposed to have at the completion of this unit? And that's what I start out by assessing. So I sort of look at my list of skills, and then I go back through the standards of learning and apply those skills to the content that we've learned. How can I have them show events in history over time? How do I have them show cause and effect? How do I have them show that they can recall, synthesize, understand, interpret, so on and so forth?
A complex task is one which causes students to function at a high level of thinking, causes students to use reading and writing, the important skills of literacy, draws on numerous intellectual strengths, has students work with a wide variety of materials, and cast them really in the light of expert producers.
A complex task is one that has any number of possible correct answers, is defensible. This is something that is authentic, that is a real question, that's an actual historical question, although I think you could do it in any subject matter, that gets students to create an interpretation that's entirely their own.
Most of us as teachers are pretty good at coming up with an idea, and then I think from that you just sort of spin it. Here's a basic idea. What's another way I could do that? What's another layer of complexity I could put in there? How could I provide a support system for second language students? In what way could this task be crafted so that it absolutely does call on multiple intellectual strengths? How do I open up the task? It's actually a very fascinating process for teachers, because it calls on us to be open-minded, to be creative, to be critical of our work, and to continue to say, but there's one more way I could do this. There's another layer I could add there.
It's really easy to make the task more. It's really hard to make the task better. And one of the things that I really focus on is that more is not better. Better is better. And understanding that complex does not mean you do 50 things. Complex means you do 3 things really, really well.
Students of all ages can work with complex tasks, meaning they can function in a group, they can think at a high level, they can use multiple modes of materials, they can become more sensitive to one another's strengths. We tend to think of intellectual strengths in terms of students who can decode text material, who can interpret text material, who can do computations in math, solve problems in math, and those are really clearly important fundamental skills for all students to develop. But there are many other intellectual strengths, such as posing good questions, playing the devil's advocate, having extreme empathy for different perspectives on an issue.
What I think about in terms of the kids when I'm planning complex instruction task is what they can bring to it. And one of the things that I have is lists and lists and lists of what I think are strengths of the children. So at the end of the class, if I saw Autumn say something really neat or really intuitive or really empathetic, and actually that's one of Autumn's real talents, is that she's extraordinarily empathetic. I'll just jot that down on like a sticky note or a pad of paper or something like that. The next day I might notice that, Mark has every single fact, which he does, memorized about certain battles, and I'll sort of make a note of that. Okay, Mark has a fact base. John, he's excellent at synthesizing concepts, at getting to put pieces together and create a product that'll work. I put him in that group so that they could use his strength of synthesis.
It's a daunting task to really unearth, to observe the intellectual strengths of each student. And a big part of that is for a teacher to become an inveterate student watcher, to listen for contributions made in class, to watch kids on a playground or in a cafeteria, to keep a clipboard as the teacher walks through the class and observes the role that students play, to give students a complicated task and watch who rises to the surface in each particular instance.
I assign students to groups in a variety of ways. I assign students in groups based on abilities, sort of intellectual strengths, but also on intellectual gaps. For example, Nikhil is an incredibly brilliant student, but he will fly off in every direction. Shaniqua is incredibly realistic and down to earth, and so she is an excellent foil for his unrealistic ideas. Who can say to him, look, this is what we can get done today. She's just a brilliant judge of what can get accomplished in a certain amount of time, which I think is an incredible gift. So I put them together to sort of foil each other. And so I do that frequently with groups. I try and make sure that I match strengths with weaknesses.
Complex instruction actually can be crafted to address readiness, interest, and mode of learning.
I think about a number of things as I plan. I think about whether or not I think the kids will want to do this project. I think about whether or not it's appropriate age-wise, developmentally. I try and do stuff that they're not insulted by, that is interesting and exciting and engaging to them without being pandering. I try and take into account what the kids' individual interests are. I tend to overplan, but I think overplanning is not a bad thing when you're doing complex instruction. I think the more you've thought through the process, the likelier you are to be able to carry it off. I think you need to be extremely realistic about what you can get done in the space of time.
As a teacher develops a complex instruction task, it's important to go back and check, does this task exemplify the traits that make complex instruction? In other words, does it cause students to think at a high level? Does it employ multiple materials, modes of expression? Does it provide a support system for students who don't speak English fluently? Does it engage kids in collaborative thinking? Does it call on every student to read and to write, but provide appropriate support for that?
At the end of each task, am I thinking differently from when I began the first task? And that's another way to sort of test and see, are you making sure that it's truly complex or are you just making it complicated? All right, in order to complete this assignment, you must do the following. There's a bunch of steps. Today we're going to be focusing on the early steps. We'll have double class tomorrow and double class Friday too. Okay, today is going to be meet in your group day to decide on 3 possible candidates for your memorial or your monument. To do this properly, you'll need to do some research. I separate the tasks into different steps because otherwise it's just a free-for-all in here. Because they're 6th graders, and if you don't say, at the end of step 1, check in with me, they just do anything. They just fly off in every direction. So I divide it up that way so that they can see a stopping point also, but so that I also have ways of saying, this is where you need to be. Have you finished step 1? And we have a common language to work with as well. The other reason I divide it up into steps is for my lower achieving students, they need to be able to see that an end is in sight. If something is 4 pages long, with a rubric and other handouts, and I hand it to them, they just collapse. They're just incapacitated by it. But if I say to them, today we are doing step 1, and it's 1 paragraph, that they can do. That's doable. And they're willing to trust me and to engage in it if they know that there's an end in sight. For each of these candidates, you have to have the following, and I really want you to have this by the end of class today. A list of reasons why it is worthy of remembrance. An explanation of how it is an example of power, what form or forms of power, it may be more than one, it may be all of them. That would certainly be intriguing. I'd love to see something like that. Was the power used well? Was the power used poorly? Those are some of our essential questions, right? How was the power used? And then whose opinion is that? And that's really important. The last thing you have to have for each of those three choices is an explanation of how there are different perspectives regarding this candidate and what those perspectives are. And I really, really expect you to be able to handle that without having to have too much trouble, because that was, I think we pretty much covered that last year in 5th grade. Once you have all three of these, you have to check in with me. Your entire group must check in with me before you proceed. Okay, there will be no designing, no drawing, no sketching, no use of colored pencils, no use of drawing paper, no use of other human beings or body parts without checking in with me and getting approval.
It's important for students to know that when they think they have reached a benchmark point, they believe they're through or through with the first draft or a first rendition of something, that they should check it with the teacher before they go ahead. In some settings, you may even want students to run their blueprint of an idea by you before they actually pursue the idea.
So if you come up with something different, that is totally fine. Just make sure you check with me. Okay, here are your choices. Models, sketches, living statues. That's where you use another human being or human beings from this class and sculpt them into whatever you want them to be.
It's important with this particular approach to be able to say to students, you should find that this task will not work as well if any one of you is missing from it.
Every single one of you in your groups must have an incredibly active role in this. The groups you are in, you cannot, not one of these groups can possibly do this project without every single person in that group using their personal strengths to pull this off. One of the things I really focus on is the fact that everybody in that group plays an extraordinarily important role, and that everybody in that group has something extremely valuable to give, and that the students themselves will be surprised at what they learn from one another. And so I try and set a lot of sort of ground rules for how the groups need to behave and what I expect from the social interaction of the groups. Okay, take a look at the rubric. I'm giving you the rubric in advance. Here it is. Take a look. Right, see this?
It's extremely important that the teacher make clear to students what quality expectations are. It's not a case where you can simply give students a piece of paper and hope that they get there.
Choice of subject, that's your content. That's one of those first three things. Subject choice reflects a thorough and complete understanding of the antebellum period, Civil War, power, and perspective. Make sure you have your concepts and your content thoroughly represented by your subject matter. Group work, this is the process. Group work together all of the time. Project was completed independently with virtually no assistance from the teacher. Okay, grading scale is on the bottom. Take a look there. You notice there's nothing below C, because if it's below a C, you're doing it again, right? We all understand that. Okay, here's what I want you guys to do right now. I want you to meet in your groups right now and see if you can narrow down to your three choices: a person, an event, an issue concept, idea, etc. Okay? Yes? All right, get to work.
You could always do the suffragettes, abolitionists. There are always battles.
In complex instruction, all the children are working on the exact same assignment, although the task that they then set for themselves is radically different with every group.
We should have split up and everybody tries to find out, like, one person does event, the other person does a person.
So which one was split up by list of all the people who could be possibilities to research on and do our project on.
Then pick the 3 best you think.
Yes. And then we'll single them out one by one and see which one ends up being our main choice.
Make sure you keep Frederick Douglass with them because he had a big part in the Civil War movement.
I'm looking for how the group is functioning together. I'm looking for how they're staying on task. I'm looking for the kind of questions they're asking. I'm looking to sort of informally assess what I think they're learning, how I think they're learning.
Focus on a group of people, the abolitionists, and then in our maybe a speech or something, we can put in there what their perspective was.
In working on complex instruction tasks, a whole array of skills that students can bring to the task have to do with facilitating the group. How do we plan our time together? How do we make sure that everyone has a role to play without stepping on someone else's toes? How do we make sure that everyone is contributing their ideas to the group? How do we ensure that we have a big idea that we're all pursuing even when we specialize on something? How do we monitor what we're doing with our time and whether or not we're working up to quality or maybe chasing a rabbit down a road? All of those are kinds of skills that students need to learn to develop, and there probably is no way to develop them other than working together.
We have the memorial to the black soldiers who died in the Civil War. I think we can tie the memorial to black soldiers during the Civil War into the 54 Massachusetts.
Alright, so connect them together somehow.
Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Elizabeth Ballard.
Can we list the reasons?
Okay, we'll start listing the reasons for all of them.
With complex instruction, you can't accomplish the task without everybody in the group. And so it creates a sense of equality and also a sense of interdependence, which makes for a true learning experience.
It's sort of about whoever the heck this guy is, John Doe. Yeah. If we're gonna do a common citizen, we can't really have all this horrific stuff happening. And so we just do his perspectives on the war, like.
Yeah, he thought the war
On the
was
war.
bad.
His sons went to war. Yeah.
Oh, never mind, I
His
need
sons went to war. His farms were destroyed because battles were fought on them. Stuff like that.
In most classrooms, when it comes to academics as other things, students are very clear on the status that belongs to their peers. Some students are high-status students, meaning successful with academics, and other students are perceived as being less successful. A student who may be weak in one particular facet may have something very remarkable to contribute in another way. So a teacher in a complex instruction setting is trying to change that perception of status. Very important in conferring status that it be genuine. It needs to be a legitimate contribution that a student made, something that's really worthy of note, not condescending.
David said there was too much information on Gettysburg to do it, but if we looked at
He's
it,
right. I mean, there's the Gettysburg
yeah.
Address.
But like, if we look at it on what it did to everybody else, not just the people who were fighting in the war, like people from Gettysburg and the rest of the country, like how they felt about it, because so many lives were lost to it, and it was.
So what you're talking about is not doing it as if it were Gettysburg, the battle. You're talking about doing a monument to sort of the emotional pitch of the country as a result of Gettysburg. That is cool. I had never thought of that. That is a really cool idea. One of the things that I try and do to attribute status is I really like to be there to catch a kid saying something really terrific or doing something really terrific or coming up with a really unbelievable idea. And then I like to make an example of that. That's a cool idea. I think you guys should explore that a little bit. Nice. Okay, now she's officially humiliated. Okay.
I think we should narrow it down to Sherman and Gettysburg.
Well, we still have Did You Read?
David, are you all right?
One of the boys in that group is on an IEP. He's got some special needs. He was dead set on doing a general. He had to do a general. It had to be Jeb Stuart. I was extremely proud of that group because what they did was they compromised. They took that idea of what must Gettysburg have done to the American psyche and applied it to a Civil War general.
We have to find the list of reasons for like and an explanation. We still need to have that for all three. But we can't narrow it down just yet. We need to find all the information first.
Yeah. All right, now that you all have a minimum of 3 things to research, what I want you to do is quickly figure out who's doing text type research, who's doing library type research, who's doing internet type research, and let's go ahead and get that done because we're running short on time. One of the things that I try and do is cut corners within the classroom by making sure stuff is out, stuff is accessible, easy to find. I have a marvelous set of classroom librarians who have organized my entire library and alphabetized it all according to author's last name and color-coded every section. That's a huge time save because the kids know, boom, just go right for the yellow dots. They go straight to the yellow dots, that's everything they need. I made sure that there were textbooks out and that everything was just pop up to the table, grab it and go. I like to put things in a folder because I don't want to waste my time with the disorganization that comes with adolescent brain. I want them to be able to just get functioning.
It says right here that the Confederacy couldn't have fought long without the slaves, so they must have relied on them and got the slave owners probably, yeah, they drafted them. And then it says right here that when they could, the African Americans ran away and joined the North, the Yankee Army, and they went to their camps. So the slaves really did not want to fight against the North. Yeah, it says something about the 54th Massachusetts. I think I'm gonna have to go find another book so we can get different perspectives on the slaves and the 54th Massachusetts.
Guys, I need you all to come and check in, please. Come and sit in your tables and check in. I have students check in. I have them check in with me. I have them check in with each other. Generally at the beginning and end of every class, but frequently at the middle part of the class as well. You guys are basically where?
I think 54th. I think
You're
that's
focusing on 54th? Okay.
Yeah, the black slaves. Yeah.
Okay, all right. So you guys are getting close to consensus. Where are you guys?
Still doing research.
You're still in your research. And they're sort of set check-in points because it causes them to focus in on what the task is, how they're performing in it, what they're doing with it, and how it's going. But most of you look like you're focusing in on Harriet, Beecher, Stowe. Is that more or less where you guys are?
Yes.
With complex instruction and using check-in with it, you can keep kids focused on the task, focused on what their group was saying, and also get kids really listening to one another. What I'd like you to do right now for the next 3 minutes is decide on your topic at your group. So far, all 3 of the topics that you guys have, I would approve of, okay?
Yeah, of course.
And this is better known, but this has better perspective.
I know.
It sounds to me like what your gut instincts are is to go with Sherman's March. Okay, so are you the holdout for the rifle? Is that what's going on? Like Martin's the rifle holdout, but the other 3 of you are keen on Sherman's March?
Pretty much.
Okay, then I would say let's go with consensus and go ahead and do Sherman's March. I certainly think that has lots of opportunity for multiple ways of presenting this and multiple perspectives to be represented. You also have various forms of power you can talk about. So I think that one hits the heart of what this assignment is. Okay, so I'd go with that. Okay.
So what
Yes, I can, but I can do it later. Okay, guys, I need to stop you for a second. Here's what I need you to do. In your packet, you will find your first status check form. It's a little half sheet of paper. With no talking, and by that I mean actual silence. I would like each of you to remove that slip of paper from your packet and fill it out.
Status reports in a complex instruction task can be really important. It's helpful for students to know that they're accountable for their time, for the responsibilities they've taken on, for the quality of their work, for the contributions to the group. And so at the end of a class period or the end of 2 days or the end of one portion of the task, students may be asked to reflect on what they have contributed, how well the group has functioned, the quality of their work. That has several benefits. It encourages the students to look at themselves as individuals, but their confluence as a group. It keeps reminding the students that they have these responsibilities to which they have to answer. And also those status reports can be very helpful to the teacher in understanding where students are, how they're progressing, both with the content and the process of what they're doing, so the teacher can intervene more appropriately to help the students succeed.
Go ahead and fill that out. That is for me to see how your group is functioning. You do not have to share what you think necessarily with the rest of your group. You do need to share it with me. Status report is a way for me to hear personally from every kid in the group how they think it's going, what their concerns are, what they're proud of, how they're contributing, and how their group is functioning. One of the things that happens with middle schoolers is that they frequently accuse each other of wild things, but really aren't working badly together. Or alternatively, they're all very, very nice to each other, but it's incredibly dysfunctional. So status report is a way for me to assess how that's going. It's also a way for me to assess what kids' anxiety levels are, because that's often a problem when you deal with groups that they're not used to working in, which anytime you have a complex instruction task, it's always going to be a radically different group from the group before. So when you have kids working with kids that they've never worked for, their stress levels tend to be high. And so it's a way for me to check in on that and also make sure that I make contact with that kid the next day and say, how are you feeling today? You know, what can I help you with? What do you need me to do to support you guys? I think you're afraid of doing it. I think we can find a way to pull it off. I do not think fear and nervousness should be, no, but listen to me. I know that it makes you nervous to try and do something of that magnitude, and that's okay with me, because I think that a certain level of insecurity is an excellent step in the right direction towards actual educational and learning experience. I think you can handle it.
Following this first class session, students continued their research and created their monuments and memorials. We rejoined them on the final day as they planned their presentations.
The students used a variety of materials to research. I had many of them researching online. I had many of them using textbooks. So they did a certain level of heavy research with every child doing a part of the research. They broke it down as to who needed to find what, and that's what they spent a bulk of their time on. And then once they'd completed that, they spent a long time discussing, arguing, debating how will this best be portrayed? What is symbolic about it? How can we translate our interpretation into something that's representative, into something that is sort of metaphoric? For example, the group that did the epitaph kind of created John Doe, the common man who was affected by the Civil War. You know, what happened to him? What did he look like? Where did he live? And then from that, they played around with metaphors and images and looked at ideas and ways that they could express the helplessness and the suffering that he went through as well.
You get something that rhymes with heart. Something that has to do, like, you know, ripping your heart apart or something. Part. Start, part. Get it? All right, now we just have to get the thing before that.
The group that was working on Sherman, I was extremely proud of that group because what they had done was find a way to compromise. They took what must the experience of Gettysburg have done to the American psyche and how did that contribute to what happened next within the war. They took that idea and applied it to a Civil War general. And so they ended up looking at Sherman's march through Georgia as basically an act of terrorism. So they created a web page. They included a political cartoon. They included several sort of first-person accounts of what happened in Georgia, and then created this as a way to remember the people who suffered in Georgia during that time.
Well, maybe I was sad, like sad is dead.
I was torn. Yeah.
After he does the presentation, talks about his thing, you should do this.
So what do we have here so far?
We have to check.
The light blue group chose to do Harriet Beecher Stowe, which I thought was a really interesting choice because there was only one young woman and only one African American in that group. And so what they did with their statue was they created her cabin, Uncle Tom's cabin, around Harriet Beecher Stowe.
When we do the presentation, you're going to read that part and I'm going to read this part. He's just going to read the forms of power that she had.
Right. He's going to explain what kind of power she had and how she used it.
Here's my only concern. I don't see that list of questions in front of you as you're designing your presentation, and that's of grave concern to me, what with those being requirements and all. So I think it's a good idea to make sure that we're double checking as we go along. And then don't forget to check with here, because if you haven't proved these things to me, then we're not quite finished with this, right?
Grading students on a complex instruction task is far easier if we have laid out the criteria precisely. I think most of us as teachers have a sense that if we have said to students, here are 6 things you're responsible for, that it's not so terribly difficult to give feedback, to assess. A complex instruction task is no more difficult and no simpler to grade than any other kind of task, as long as we've delineated the content, process, and product criteria.
That's what I'm asking you to do with this perspective thing, is look at what is meaningful to us, and will that be meaningful to other countries as well? Just think and play with it for a minute or two. I'm assessing a variety of things in the rubric. One of them is content. That's, have they done their research? Have they put together historical fact into an interpretation that I think is defensible and valid? One of them is process, which is how they've worked as a group. Have they been independent? Have they worked effectively together? And then 2 of them are product, one of them being the monument product and one of them being the presentation product. So I try and do it more as a holistic, you have shown you're advanced in this area, but emerging in this area. For your next project, I want to see you move towards, proficient here.
Certainly when students do any kind of task in a class, whether it's a 1-day one, a 3-day one, a greatly extended one, a portion of the reason for doing the task is to ensure that each student learn what he or she needs to learn. There are multiple ways to handle the individual accountability piece in a complex instruction task. It may be that each student has to keep a learning log as the group progresses and record both what's going on and what their thinking is as it evolves. There may be a culminating journal prompt that students would do, a quiz that comes at the end, a group quiz or based on a group discussion that a teacher does with students.
Go ahead and come on up here. And since your statue is fragile, let's go ahead and let Harriet Beecher Stowe sit on the stool, and the rest of you guys can stand around as you do this and present to the rest of the group.
Well, our group did Harriet Beecher Stowe, and we chose to do it because, she's pretty unique, and really behind the scenes lady who influenced many important people throughout the war.
Harriet Beecher Stowe was a white female abolitionist. When she was younger, she went down south to talk to slaves, and she saw how cruel that the slave owners was being towards slaves, and how that they shouldn't have slaves.
We're going to be talking about the powers that she had. The intellectual, the book Uncle Tom's Cabin influenced many people. Economic, because the outcome of the book caused many people to free slaves.
We needed a monument in this form because this is linked closely to the Lincoln Memorial, because she influenced Lincoln quite a bit. Apparently when they came to see each other, he greeted her as, "So you were the little woman who wrote the book that started the Great War."
Okay, and now I'm going to talk about perspective. Harriet Beecher Stowe was a fabulous white female abolitionist, although many slave owners from the 1800s might not think so. In fact, probably all slave owners thought she was a devil come to steal their property. I think that the statue is the perfect form of a monument because, like Lincoln, she played a major part in freeing slaves. And Lincoln's memorial was very like this.
A wise teacher in a complex instruction class will help his or her students reflect just as the teacher reflected. What was the best part of this? What worked for us as a group? What worked for me as an individual?
And what I thought that you did that was really cool was that you ensconced her in her cabin, which was her symbol of the oppression of slavery, which I thought that was kind of a neat idea.
A community of learners is a team, and the teacher may be the head team member, but is still a team member. And when the whole team reflects on the game plan and the success of the game, then everyone's likely to grow further and further together as a team.
Okay, here's what I would like you guys to do. Take your self-assessment out of your packet, and I want you guys to start on that, please. The self-assessment is a way for me to assess how that student saw the experience. That's less something that I assign a letter grade to, and more one that I use to talk with the student about whether or not I think they're being thoughtful about their achievements or contributions, or whether or not I think they're being fair to themselves. And so they're starting to see each other's talents and strengths and abilities, and they're starting to rely on that more, which I'm really happy to see.
In the beginning, developing complex instruction tasks is complex for teachers. And Elizabeth Cohen suggests that we proceed slowly so that we are comfortable and competent with what we're doing. But research suggests that if over time the practices and philosophy of complex instruction become a part of our classes, we are highly likely to find more students engaged in the classroom, greater degrees of participation, and stronger student achievement.
One of the things that I try and do with my students is to make sure that they understand that I expect them to go well beyond what they think they can do, and that they have to trust me because I know that they can get there.
Our group decided to do a view of the common man, and we wrote a poem or an epitaph, and Yosef's going to read that. Okay.
John Doe. Here lies a man who died in the arms of 1,000 Union soldiers that burned all the farms. He grew up well in Orange County, good health, good food, and friends a bounty. The orange was squeezed by the hand of war. It could not be stopped when it asked for more. It took his father, his brother, his life, his health, his money, and his friend with the fife. His wealth was shattered when the first torch hit, like hell touching heaven in the greatest fists. The waves of gold atop the flame, like Lancelot's soul, a burning with shame. So ends this man with a broken heart, cracked down the middle without letting it start.
And what does your monument do to address that kind of whatever action?
Showing that
It takes his life, which was pretty simple, unlike generals and stuff where it was all complicated and everything. And we took it and made it kind of elegant and showed that his life was worth telling.
What I learned this time around is that sometimes they go past what I think they can do and go even further than that.